The Old King and the Mice. The old king in Tibet was an excellent man. One day, as he was sitting on his throne, he was told that a grandly dressed mouse was at the gate asking to see him. The king was much amused at the idea of having a visit from a talking mouse. So he ordered this splendid fellow to be brought in at once. It is a custom of all visitors in Tibet to bring a present of a white scarf. So the king was delighted to see that the mouse came with not exactly a scarf, but a beautiful single thread of white silk. "Welcome, my good fellow. What can I do for you?" "Oh, king," began the mouse, "this year our harvest was bad. Our crops were poor. We may go hungry unless we can borrow enough grain to carry us through the winter. Will you help us?" "Yes," nodded the king. "How much do you want?" "I think we'll need a barn full, your highness." "Good gracious," said the king, astonished. "If I gave you a whole barn full of grain, how would you carry it away?" "Leave that to me," said the mouse. So the king agreed. He ordered his officers to throw open the doors to his biggest barn. And that night, the mouse ruler called all his subjects together. Each picked up as much grain as he could carry. One mouse held grains in his mouth. Another had a sack on his back. One curled up grain in his tail. And they made a tidy job of it. By morning, not a grain was left. The next morning, when the king went to look at the barn, he was astonished. "These mice are very efficient," he said. And after the next harvest, the mouse ruler paid the grain his full plus extra. So the king decided the mice were honest as well as clever. And not long after this, another king came with thousands of soldiers to attack the old king. This enemy marched his army to the banks of the river, ready to cross the next day and attack. The mice were very upset and worried. So once again, the mouse king put on his grandest robes and carried another single thread of white silk to the king. "I have come, O king, to see if I might help you. You did my people a great favor. If we can be of service, we'll do our best." And the king had been very depressed after the war, but it made him laugh to hear this tiny mouse offer to help. "Thank you very much," he said. "Soon we'll be attacked. There are thousands of soldiers against my few hundred men. But really, how could the mice help? Do you remember, O king, that you thought we could not carry away a barn full of grain? Trust us. Leave us 100,000 sticks. Each must be about a foot long. Lay them neatly in rows along the bank of the river. Do this, and maybe we can get rid of the enemy." "If you can do it, I will grant you anything," said the king. And the king gave orders, and by dusk, 100,000 sticks were placed in neat rows along the river. Then a large army of mice gathered. Each mouse took one stick to stand on and one stick to steer with, and off they went. It was quite dark by the time they crossed the river. The enemy soldiers were asleep when the mice scattered themselves throughout the camp. Some went to the bowmen and nibbled their bowstrings. Some went to musketeers and gnawed their musket slings. Some bit holes in the men's clothes or bit off their pigtails. Others bit holes in sacks so that everything spilled. In fact, these bold mice attacked anything they could choose. Soon tents, food, grain, and provisions of all kinds were shreds. 2 hours later, the mouse king collected his army on the river bank. Once more they used their sticks, rafts to paddle back. The next morning at daybreak, there was a loud outcry from the army. As each man awoke, he found his clothes in rags, his pigtail nibbled, his bowstring chewed. What was worse, there was nothing to eat for breakfast, not a single crumb. And before Before long, the camp was in an uproar. Each soldier accused another of taking his things or eating his food, and a huge fight broke out among the soldiers. The old king came with his small army to the river to see what was happening. When the enemy saw this army marching toward them with drums pounding, they began running away. The enemy king sent a letter saying he was no longer did he want to fight, and at once a peace treaty was signed. "Now, what can I do for you?" asked the old king of the mouse ruler later in the day. "We'd like you to make a law that says no cats can live in this land, Your Majesty," replied the mouse. "Granted," said the old king, and he and his subjects, both men and mice, lived happily for a good many years.